well, first let's go back to WEF. A lot of those statements, like you will own nothing and be happy, particularly offend those that actually have property and have wealth, right? But I would say the vast majority of people that are basically struggling to ends meet and don't own property, and those words just basically will wash off their back, and they'll actually almost be comforting to them because they're basically wage slaves for paying rent. So if you want to combat that statement, then basically if you go on and if you have property and say this is not right, it's going to take my property away, how do you make the people that don't have property be worried about that statement? You won't be happy.
But first of all, I'd like to just clarify that statement, because most people are already technically have nothing. So anyone who's financially minded out there and maybe did accounting at school, there's something called a balance sheet. And the balance sheet is a summary of all of your assets. Those are the things that are worth money, and all of your liabilities. And those are the debts that you owe. And if you have a positive balance sheet, then you're in the money. And if you have a negative balance sheet, you're in debt. And to be perfectly honest, if you have a mortgage on your house, you don't own that house, right? You might technically have bought it, but actually it has a charge on the bank. And until you've paid that last dollar, pound, zloty of your mortgage, the bank can take your house, right? So many people don't realize that they already have less than nothing because their debts are much bigger than their assets. And at the moment, we're seeing a situation where the banks have done some really crazy stuff with regards to how they can bail themselves out in the time of a crisis. After 2008, they introduced these. 2008, the banks were bailed out. That means they took our tax money and gave it to the banks to save them. They should have all just failed, but they saved them. But after that, they introduced new laws that say the banks first bail themselves in. And what that means is they can go to your deposits and your assets that you have put with the bank, and they can take those to bail themselves out. So they already have sort of access to your deposits, your savings accounts, perhaps even your investment portfolios, which they can just dip their hand into afterwards. But then also interest rates are rocketing. Property markets in many countries are very unstable. And it'll be really interesting to see how because most of the world's wealth is in property. I think most countries, I think Sweden, it's maybe 80% of the wealth of the country is real estate and property related. So I think we're going to see some I think a lot of people don't actually realize how little they have. And they live in an arrogance that they have a lot. But, even these people who have $10 million homes, they've got a $7 million mortgage. If they were to lose their job or something, there would be some kind of a shock. Even I was toying with the scenario that if there's a drop in the property market and the value of your house becomes less than the value of your the value of your mortgage, I have this theory that might trigger like a situation where you have to repay the bank, or there's a demand on the mortgage to rebalance because you're out of your loan to value sort of criteria within your mortgage agreement, that they could use something like that to take your property. So on the one hand, all these people who have, I think, are living in a false narrative that they actually have when they don't. And the people who don't have, and we're talking about all the people who are, it's an ever growing proportion of society who have been pushed down by the system. They didn't choose to have nothing. They have nothing because someone else has taken from them or prevented them from having something, their basics. I think those people, they need to be aware that it can only get worse. So, they might think that the World Economic Forum is offering them salvation, but actually the World Economic Forum is going to take every little last bit of human dignity, freedom, potential for a better future away from them. And so if you fall for their suave sort of words because you already have nothing, believe me, nothing is still something with regards to what they will do with us all if they come to power and can, inject us all with their hack the human, mind altering, medical, like happiness inducing stuff. So my word to those people is to say, you still have so much that they can take away from you, that it's well worth fighting, and realize that you are actually not terribly different to those people who, may have property, but don't realize that they actually don't.
I remember once when I was a teenager, I asked somebody in a shop who was an adult, and we were playing these board games, and I says to him, why don't we give more money to Africa? And he basically says, well, the reason that we don't is that basically my son here can go to school. I like having a car. I like having a home. And his idea was, I'm happy with my Western selfishness, being more well off than people in Africa. And he's basically said that Africa's poor so we can stay rich. Now, I don't really agree with that is the case. I think that Africa has a lot of internal problems. But if we want to help Africa by ourselves, it's almost like, what can we actually do? Because there's trade problems. It's very expensive to ship there. We can't exactly go there and argue with some dictator and say, stop treating your people wrong. So how do we as individuals help some place like Africa without something like WEF making global pacts, other things like Agenda 2030, all these global things that have the strength to change things in these countries? And so if we are to get rid of all these global efforts, what are we to replace them with to help these people that are sick and dying and poor?
That's a great question, and that's really about focusing on the solutions. And I do think that you're very good at that, because most people just skirt around the solutions and spend all their time pontificating about the problems. I'm developing my thoughts on this, and I think it sort of has three layers. So one is you need to be the change you want to see in the world. I know that's such an overused statement, but this role model mentality of living, first of all, your best life, that's super important. So as part of our academy, we do this exercise where you take stock of where you are, and then you take stock of sort of your optimal or your utopian state. And you sort of look at your values and your beliefs and sort of where you come from. And we need to all do that, particularly, why are we here? What is the purpose of you being here? I personally think that we're all here to experience as much of diversity of experience as we can, grow our consciousness, do good things, create, contribute, and help society be the best it can. So we need to do a bit of work around that. So that's getting your own house in order. Second thing is that once you've done yourself, you need to help collaborate and inspire those around you. And that's your community. And you were talking about how we're too stressed, too busy to even know our neighbors. You need to know your neighbors, right? Because people that are much less likely to kill you or steal from you, right? And they're much more likely to help you, to defend you.
Sometimes it can be your friends, like the worst enemies. So.
Well, true. But I'd like to say, on the whole, every time I go to protests or something like that, I always speak to the police now after getting kidnapped by them once. The same thing goes with some of my they're not my enemies, but these people that I'm saying are doing bad things. I try to make sure that they know who I am and that kind of thing. And then you do this community thing. And actually the community thing is like a multiplier, right? You know, that's the way, like you said, when we were tribes, we all, you know, it takes a village to raise a child. All these concepts are so true. Life is a lot easier when you realize that when you need help, like in an Amish community, I don't know, you want to build something, you say, hey, can someone help me build? And 20 people come, right? And then it's this perpetual positivity and support network. So you've got to do that. And then thirdly is now that we have this society where you can connect globally, you then need to take this community concept and then build it out. Because you'd be surprised how many people do go to Africa or do business with Africa or know people in Africa. So even though you as an individual might be sitting in Scotland, Kiev, Paris, Sweden, you still have within 2 or 3 degrees of separation influence and access to Africa. And you need to use that influence because, you know, our governments, you know, we can influence over our governments. And also, I would highly recommend people use modern technology like the aeroplane, which is an incredible machine that I don't think we should all have flight shame unless we're elites or pointless, business people flying around for stupid reasons, or Amazon 1-hour delivery air freight. Go to Africa, go to Africa, see what it's like. See if you can be a positive, if you can help positively influence it. So that's kind of the way that I view it is we all have to start at home, make sure our own house is in order, and then expand out through our communities. And then literally you got to go to Africa. Everyone can. And, the Africans have so much to teach us. Yeah, it might be a little bit wish-washy answer, but I do think that that's a lot better than handing it over to the World Economic Forum.